Welcome to Sci-Fi Lost Vault. Today we dive into a tale of impossible fate. An alien princess defies her own kind, forging a forbidden bond with a human warrior. As she gives birth to a child never meant to exist, the fate of two civilizations hangs in the balance. Will this child be a symbol of unity or the spark of war? Let's get started. Darren Cross shivered as the energy restraints tightened around his wrists, static currents crackling against the scorched plating of his flight suit. Two towering Zephyr guards, their bioorganic armor shimmering with an eerie green hue, dragged him down a corridor that twisted like the ribcage of some colossal slumbering beast. The Vorthkai was unlike any human vessel. It was not merely a warship, it was alive. The obsidian walls pulsed with luminous veins, their glow synchronized to a deep, rhythmic thrum that felt disturbingly like the heartbeat of a leviathan. The air was thick with the scent of alien herbs, cool and invigorating, yet tinged with a numbing sharpness that set his nerves on edge. Darren stole a glance through the oval-shaped viewport lining the corridor. Outside, the Magellanic Nebula stretched like a cosmic tapestry, its violet-blue hues swirling in hypnotic motion, drawn and distorted by the massive warship's gravitational field. Yet to him, the vast beauty of space was no longer a marvel, only a silent witness to the bleak fate of a prisoner of war. They rounded a bend and entered a circular chamber, its centerpiece an eerie, glowing cocoon of organic matter. The other prisoners were led away, their fates diverging into unseen corridors. But Darren remained. Why just me? The thought barely formed before the doors sealed shut behind him. And then he had his answer. Before him, elevated on a raised obsidian dais, stood Voktharis. Nearly 3 meters tall, the Zephyr warlord loomed like a specter of authority. His silver-gray skin gleamed beneath the ambient glow of the levitating energy torque encircling his neck. His eyes, void of sclera, were nothing but abyssal black pools, reflecting the light like liquid crystal. His robes, woven from biosynthetic fibers, clung to his powerful frame, pulsating with crimson streaks that ran like living circuitry beneath his skin. There was no greeting, no translator, only a voice, low, resonant, speaking directly into Darren's mind, not through sound, but through sheer force of will. Darren Cross, the Defiler, the one who has brought an unspeakable stain upon our kind. Darren's brow furrowed. What the hell was he talking about? The answer came before he could react. A side door hissed open. Xhorya stepped through. Her belly is bigger than usual. She is pregnant. Darren stood frozen. Wrapped in the soft obsidian silk, the infant stirred, a small, fragile motion that sent a shiver through his entire being. Then its eyes opened. One glowed with the luminescent blue of the Zephyr, the other a deep, human brown. Time fractured. The world around him faded into an eerie silence, leaving only the thunderous echo of his own heartbeat. No, it couldn't be. His gaze snapped up to Xhorya, the Zephyr warrior, his enemy, and something far more. Her bioorganic armor clung to her lithe yet powerful form, glowing patterns tracing the length of her slender arms. But her eyes, once ablaze with defiance, now burned with something else. Pain. Resolve. This child is mine, Darren whispered, barely able to believe the words escaping his lips. Xhorya said nothing, but the way she tightened her grip around the infant spoke louder than any answer. A ripple of murmurs erupted through the chamber. Darren turned, taking in his surroundings. Encircling him were the Zephyr elders, ancient, regal figures whose translucent wings pulsed with bioluminescent energy. At the center, unmoving on his obsidian throne, sat Voktharis, his abyssal eyes locked onto Darren with cold detachment. A disgrace, a sharp voice sliced through the murmurs. One of the elders, his presence exuding authority, never before in the history of the Zephyr. An abomination, another spat. An affront to the sacred order of our kind. They did not look at the child with curiosity, nor with wonder, only disgust. Voktharis had yet to move, yet his voice swelled, reverberating through Darren's mind like an inescapable current. Darren Cross, he intoned, his words weighty as judgment itself. You have brought forth a forbidden existence, a union of blood that should never be. His hand rose, the crimson veins running beneath his skin flared like molten rivers. And for that, you must die. The energy torque around his neck flared to life. A brilliant column of searing white light erupted from the ceiling, aimed directly at Darren. Survival instinct screamed through his body. He lurched backward, but before he could move, the Xhorya warriors at his flanks leveled their energy lances at his throat, sealing his fate in an unbreakable vice. Then, a voice shattered the air. "Wait!" The command rang out, bold, unyielding. All eyes turned to Xhorya. She stepped forward, her stance unwavering as she faced Vaktheris directly. He has the right to a trial. A silence thick as the void itself settled over the chamber. A trial? One of the elders scoffed. You dare invoke the right of challenge for an outsider? Xhorya's gaze did not waver. Our laws decree, if one is deemed a threat yet has not been judged by the divine, he has the right to prove his existence. Darren barely understood the specifics, but he knew one thing. It was his only chance to survive. Vaktheris remained still for a long moment, then slowly rose to his full, imposing height. You wish him to stand the trial? Xhorya did not blink. Yes. The warlord's gaze shifted to Darren. There was no fury in his expression, no visible contempt, only an emotionless, distant calculation. Very well, human, Vaktheris murmured. Then you will face the judgment of the gods. Xhorya's sky burned in a violet haze of death. Energy storms spiraled across the desolate plains, splitting the atmosphere with crimson lightning, great, jagged scars against the heavens. Towering obsidian monoliths jutted from the earth, their surfaces worn by eons of relentless winds and storms. In the electrically charged air, eerie clusters of spectral light drifted, remnants of a civilization long lost to time. Darren remembered the moment he fell to this forsaken world. A year ago, his fighter had been shot down. The last thing he saw before blacking out was Xhorya's churning violet clouds, swallowing him whole. He hadn't been the only one to fall. Xhorya, his sworn enemy, had been cast down with him. At first, they tried to kill each other. He could still recall their first encounter in the ruins, a crumbling city where ancient crystal formations pulsed like ghostly lanterns. Xhorya had taken him down in an instant, her energy blade a hair's breadth from his throat. But she didn't finish him. Instead, she had stepped away, vanishing into the shadows, leaving him alive. From then on, they survived separately. Darren relied on his military instincts, hunting, scavenging water from subterranean caverns, building shelter from the wreckage of fallen ships. He learned to navigate the raging storms, to evade the spectral beasts, creatures that drifted between dimensions, visible only in Xhorya's flickering twilight. Xhorya was different. She understood the planet in ways he never could. She had a device that read the planet's energy currents, allowing her to sense danger before it struck. He had once seen her leap from a sheer cliff into the heart of a storm, landing with the grace of someone untouched by gravity itself. They might have continued to ignore each other, if not for the monster. Day 20 on Xhorya. Darren was deep within the crystal forest, searching for water. Towering spires of luminescent stones stretched skyward, casting an ethereal green glow. The air was cool, an unmistakable sign that water was nearby. Then, a deep, guttural growl rumbled through the stillness. Not the storm. Something else. Darren froze. The crystal canopy trembled. His hand went instinctively to his plasma rifle, eyes scanning the darkness. Then, he saw it. A towering beast, easily 10 meters tall, its semi-transparent skin flowing like molten glass. It had no eyes, only bioluminescent veins pulsing along its body, sending out waves of energy like a predator sensing prey in the abyss. Shit! Darren took a cautious step back. A mistake. The creature snapped toward him in an instant. Boom! It lunged, shattering crystal pillars in its path. Darren dove, rolling to the side as he fired a plasma shot straight into its chest. The bolt hit, then vanished. The creature's body absorbed the energy like water into sand. No effect. Darren turned and ran, but the screech behind him told him it was gaining fast. Then, a spear of energy shot down from above. Darren's breath caught. Xhorya. She descended like a phantom, her glowing eyes cutting through the dark. Her spear struck the creature, causing it to rear back with a guttural roar. But it wasn't enough. It turned on her. Move, Xhorya shouted. No time to argue. Darren leapt onto the ridge behind her as she hurled a small energy sphere to the ground. A brilliant explosion of light flared, forcing the beast to recoil, shrieking before it melted back into the abyss. Darren exhaled sharply, turning to face her. "You just saved my ass?" Xhorya didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained locked on the crystal forest, eyes narrowed. "It'll be back." Then she turned to him, those glowing emerald eyes unrateable. "We don't have a choice. If we want to survive, we work together." The energy storm raged across the desolate land, streaking the sky with violet lightning. Ancient stone spires shattered like brittle glass, reduced to nothing beneath the storm's fury. In the dim half-light of a derelict starship, wrecked and abandoned for centuries, Darren Cross watched Xhorya. The woman who had once been his mortal enemy now sat before him, breath shallow, body trembling from the searing pain coursing through her veins. She was wounded. A deep gash ran across her left shoulder, oozing the luminous blue-green ichor of her kind. The bioluminescent fluid shimmered in the dim glow of scattered crystal fragments, painting an eerie, spectral outline across her form. Her expression remained impassive, proud as ever, but Darren could see the way her muscles tensed against the agony. He could have left her. Every instinct of a soldier told him this was the perfect moment to eliminate a dangerous foe. And yet, he hesitated. Maybe it was because they had just fought side by side, or maybe it was the way she had thrown herself between him and that monstrous predator without a second thought. Darren exhaled sharply, then crouched beside her. "Don't move," he muttered, tearing a strip from his jacket, fashioning makeshift bandages. Xhorya's piercing gaze locked onto him, cold enough to freeze the air between them. But when he pressed the cloth against her wound, she didn't resist. The ruins around them belonged to an ancient vessel, one that had likely crashed onto Xhorya millennia ago. Twisted metal, half buried beneath creeping vines and bioluminescent growths, loomed over them in eerie silence. The air carried a whisper of something long forgotten, something waiting. As Darren moved to secure a more stable shelter, his fingers brushed against a section of corroded metal. Beneath the layers of dust and decay, strange carvings covered the wall, intricate, flowing symbols etched deep into the ship's hull. His brows furrowed. "What the hell is this?" He ran a hand over the ancient markings. Xhorya, despite her exhaustion, turned her gaze toward the engravings. The moment she saw them, her expression shifted. First surprise, then disbelief, then something else entirely. "This is impossible," she whispered in her native tongue, her voice lower than he had ever heard it. Darren narrowed his eyes. "You recognize these?" Xhorya didn't answer at first. She stepped closer, fingers tracing the symbols as if trying to unlock something buried deep in her memory. "This race, they existed long before the Xhorya," she said finally, her tone unreadable. "We always believed ourselves to be the first. But if these inscriptions are real, then we may only be the remnants of something far greater." Darren raised an eyebrow. "You're saying your people weren't the first civilization?" Xhorya didn't respond. Instead, she swayed slightly, her breathing growing unsteady. Darren immediately recognized the signs. She was losing too much energy. "You need rest," he said. Xhorya shook her head. "No, I need to begin the restoration ritual." Before he could question her, she lowered herself onto the cold metallic floor, closed her eyes, and something changed. The bioluminescent veins along her skin pulsed with a soft emerald glow, tracing intricate patterns across her body like living circuitry. Darren had never seen anything like it. The air around them thickened, heavy with an unseen force, as if something ancient and powerful had just stirred from slumber. The glow surrounding Xhorya intensified, enveloping her in a quiet, radiant energy. Then, Darren felt it. A sharp, dizzying sensation surged through him, a wave of unfamiliar emotions and fragmented visions cascading into his mind. Memories, not his own. He saw planets he had never set foot on, felt the icy winds of an alien world brush against his skin. Moments, faces, fleeting echoes of a life that was not his. They belonged to Xhorya. Darren stiffened, realization slamming into him like a physical force. A mind link, a rare phenomenon among the Xhorya. A deep psychic bond formed only when two beings shared energy on the most fundamental level. something that could never happen between a human and a Xhorya. And now it had. They were bound. The energy storms of Xhorya were unlike anything Darren had ever witnessed. They weren't just rain, wind, or lightning, but swirling tempests of raw light, ripping across the desolate landscape with arcs of energy that tore through the violet sky. Every strike left behind scorched craters, pulsating with an eerie blue glow. Darren and Xhorya had taken shelter within the wreckage of the ancient starship, where the corroded metal walls were the only thing standing between them and nature's wrath. Faint flickers of light pulsed from scattered energy crystals embedded in the ship's structure, casting ghostly shadows on the engraved symbols that neither of them had yet deciphered. Xhorya sat against a rusted bulkhead, her body still weak from the restoration ritual. But there was something else, something more pressing, that occupied Darren's thoughts. The bond. They could sense each other's thoughts. At first, Darren assumed it was a lingering after-effect, perhaps an unintended consequence of her bioenergy interacting with his nervous system. But as time passed, the emotions and impressions flowing into his mind weren't fading. They were becoming clearer. Caution, curiosity, a hint of skepticism, and a deep, aching loneliness. Xhorya, in turn, felt the same from Darren. Whenever his thoughts wandered too intensely, memories of Earth, of fallen comrades, she perceived them, even if unspoken. For a long while, neither of them spoke, lost in their own contemplation. It was Darren who finally broke the silence, not with words, but with a simple gesture. He reached into the pocket of his flight suit and pulled out a small, worn pouch. Ever tried this before? He unsealed it, revealing a bit of freeze-dried coffee, one of the last remnants from his survival kit. Xhorya arched a brow, curiosity flashing in her golden eyes. "What is it?" Darren smirked, scooping some powder into a bottle of water, giving it a quick shake before handing it over. "Coffee. Pretty common on Earth. We drink it in the mornings to stay awake, or on long nights when there's too much to think about." She took it hesitantly, bringing it to her nose. The scent was strong, burnt, yet strangely enticing. She took a small sip, then immediately grimaced. "Bitter," Darren chuckled. "Everyone says that at first." They continued talking, sharing what seemed like insignificant details, yet they bridged a gap neither had acknowledged before. Darren spoke of bread, how he remembered waking up to the warm scent of it as a child, the comfort of home and quiet mornings. In return, Xhorya told him of a plant from her homeworld, Rylve, a flower that only bloomed when all three of Xhorya's moons aligned. Its translucent petals shimmered like constellations, and only those with a true mental bond could perceive its real fragrance. "I've never seen its true beauty myself," she murmured. "Why not?" She hesitated, then spoke softly. "Because I've never had a bond with anyone." The words lingered in the air between them, carrying a weight neither of them had the vocabulary to define. Outside, the storm raged on. Winds howled through the fractured hull, filling the wreckage with ghostly echoes, like the trapped voices of 1,000 lost souls. A deafening blast split the night as an energy bolt struck nearby, shaking the entire structure. Darren glanced at Xhorya. She was already looking at him. They both knew tonight could very well be their last. Something unspoken passed between them then, an understanding deeper than words. It wasn't just the psychic link. It was something primal, something forged in survival, in the recognition that, in the vast emptiness of the universe, they were all each other had. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. But they understood. In that moment, two lost souls collided, drawn together in the eye of the storm, a connection beyond species, beyond history, beyond the boundaries of what should have been possible. That night, something happened that neither of them could have predicted, and the universe would never be the same again. The violet sky of Xhorya was now ablaze with the cold, silver lights of Xhorya warships hovering like silent sentinels over the scarred land below. The energy storms had subsided, leaving behind a wasteland of cracked earth where wisps of smoke curled from the deep fissures, like the planet itself was gasping for breath after its own fury. Darren and Xhorya stood side by side, gazing into the endless expanse above. They had sent a distress signal, but now what was meant to be salvation had turned into a sentence. The largest vessel in the fleet descended without a sound, its sheer size swallowing the sky. A powerful downdraft whipped through the ruins, sending plumes of dust spiraling into the air. Darren could hear Xhorya's breath quicken beside him, not out of fear, but because she knew this was the end. The end of whatever fragile freedom they had carved out for themselves. The ship's entrance yawned open, revealing the dark void of its hold. From its depths, Zephyr warriors emerged in perfect formation. Their biosynthetic armor pulsed with an eerie glow, shifting with each movement like living extensions of their bodies. At the front stood a towering figure, exuding authority, his piercing gaze locking onto Xhorya. "Xhorya, you have been gone too long." The deep voice carried the weight of judgment, cold and absolute. Xhorya did not respond immediately. Instead, she turned to Darren, her expression holding a sorrow he had never seen before, the sorrow of someone who knew fate was inevitable, yet still longed to defy it. "You must return." The voice came again, this time laced with impatience. Darren clenched his fists. He knew there was no choice, yet something in him refused to accept this. They had survived together, endured the impossible, and now, in the span of mere moments, everything was being torn apart. Xhorya took a slow step toward her kin, but as she neared, one of the warriors raised an arm, and a surge of radiant blue energy lashed out, wrapping around Darren and yanking him violently to the ground. "Wait!" Xhorya's voice rang with fury, her golden eyes flashing. "He is not an enemy. He is human. He does not belong here." Darren struggled, but the energy bindings tightened, searing into his skin like molten steel. The pressure pinned him down, as though the very fabric of reality had conspired to trap him in an inescapable fate. "Xhorya!" he called out to her, his voice raw, but she could do nothing, only stare back at him, her eyes filled with 1,000 unsaid words. She could not save him, and he did not know that, in that moment, an unspoken truth was hidden from him. Xhorya carried his child. Then the world turned to darkness as the energy surged through his consciousness, pulling him into the void of captivity. Dim light cascaded from the bioluminescent crystals embedded in the ceiling of the Zephyr High Court, casting wavering streaks of blue and violet across the organic walls, which pulsed ever so slightly, like the slow, rhythmic breath of a living entity. The silence was so complete that Xhorya could hear the steady cadence of her own heartbeat. But it was no longer the same. It had changed. It no longer resonated with the body she had once known. A month had passed since she had been torn from Darren, and now an undeniable truth had begun to take shape. She placed a hand over her abdomen. There, beneath her touch, she could feel it, a nascent life force, fragile yet unwavering. A being that had never existed before in Zephyr history, a child carrying the blood of both a human and a Zephyr, Darren's child. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. But even without looking, she could sense the movement within her, something delicate yet fierce, a presence she could not fully comprehend. Yet one truth was painfully clear. This child would never be welcomed in this world. The doors behind her slid open with a quiet hiss. Heavy footsteps echoed through the chamber, pulling her from her thoughts. A procession of high council elders entered, their towering figures draped in ceremonial robes, their luminous blue eyes as cold and calculating as ever. They regarded her with the same impassive scrutiny they always had. But this time, their gaze carried something more than disappointment or judgment. It carried fear. "Xhorya," the voice of Voktharis, the supreme arbiter, resonated through the chamber, low and absolute. "You have committed the unforgivable." Xhorya clenched her fists but met his gaze unflinchingly. "I have no regrets." A ripple of unease spread through the council. For the first time, the unshaken expressions of the elders wavered with uncertainty. It was as if even they could not fully comprehend the enormity of what had transpired, a Zephyr and a human, creating life together. It was not merely a violation of biological doctrine, it was an abomination against their very legacy, a fracture in the unyielding foundation of their species' existence. "You do not understand," Voktharis continued, his voice hardening. If this truth spreads, it could unravel everything. The Xyphor will not accept a half-breed, an anomaly that belongs to neither world. Heat surged through Xhorya's veins. This is not an anomaly. This is a life. No. Vakhtharis took a deliberate step forward, his glacial gaze piercing through her. It is a threat. Xhorya's breath hitched, anger flaring in her chest. Then what do you intend to do? Kill it the moment it is born. Her voice was sharp now, cutting through the stillness like a blade. No one answered, but their silence spoke volumes. A cold shiver crept down her spine. They would do it. They would erase this child from history, purge it as though it had never existed. To them, it was nothing more than a mistake, one that must be corrected. But they were wrong. They would not touch her child, which left her with only one choice. She had to escape. A heavy metallic clang echoed as the gates slid open, forcing Darren into the vast space beyond. Pale blue energy lines streaked across the arena's ceiling, casting a spectral glow that swept over him like an unspoken judgment, an evaluation only the Xyphor could comprehend. How long had he been here? A day? A week? Or had mere hours passed since his sentencing? Darren couldn't tell. The only thing that remained vivid in his mind was the last image of Xhorya before they were torn apart, her sharp, unreadable gaze, her face devoid of emotion, as if nothing had ever existed between them. Above him, suspended in the void of the colossal warship, floating platforms encircled the main arena like orbiting moons. Hundreds of Xyphor eyes watched him, not with curiosity, but with the cold scrutiny of a species that saw itself perched at the peak of evolution. At the highest throne, Vakhtharis sat, his gaze unwavering, and beside him, Xhorya was there. But no one knew that within Xhorya's mind, a tempest was raging. She did not want to be here. She did not want to witness this. She had run. The moment she discovered the existence of her child, she had done what no Xhorya warrior had ever dared. She defied the council, abandoned her rank, forsook her own kind, all to protect a life that was never meant to exist. She had fled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, beyond the territories where Xyphor ships could track her. But everything had changed. They found her, not to kill her, but to bring her back, on one condition. Darren. They wanted her to be part of his trial, to stand upon this platform and witness his fate unfold. That was the only way her child would be allowed to live. She had betrayed Darren once, and now she was betraying him again. Xhorya clenched her fists, her sharp nails biting into her palms. She could not show emotion. She could not let them see that her heart was trembling. Below, in the heart of the arena, Darren knew none of this. He only looked up, seeing Xhorya's silhouette standing among those who would decide his fate. And he wondered, why? Why was she there, standing with those who had condemned him? The ground beneath his feet suddenly trembled. A deafening roar cracked through the air, and before he could react, the vast emptiness of the arena began to shift. The structures moved like a living entity, walls twisting, platforms grinding against one another as they reassembled into something entirely new. This was no mere dueling ground. This was a living world, a battlefield designed for annihilation. The space in front of him warped as if reality itself was being bent. In the blink of an eye, a violent sandstorm erupted, consuming the arena and transforming the once flat terrain into a burning desert, jagged spires of rock bursting from the ground like the fangs of an ancient beast. Heat engulfed him, searing his skin. But his gaze never left the high platform where Xhorya stood. He clenched his fists. If this was their trial for him, then he would fight, to the very end. Darren took a deep breath, his chest tightening under the suffocating heat of the arena. His exhaled breath turned into wisps of vapor as the simulated desert continued to expand, shifting and reshaping. But he had no time to adjust. A massive shadow descended before him. Vakhtharis, the supreme ruler of the Xyphor, Xhorya's father, had entered the battlefield. The bioarmor covering his towering frame pulsed with a violet-blue glow, shimmering like a living star. He was not merely a ruler by political power. He was a warrior, the strongest of his kind. Vakhtharis said nothing. He simply raised a hand, and at once the arena trembled. Stones shattered, and currents of raw energy slithered through the air like living serpents coiling around his outstretched arm. Darren felt his heartbeat spike. This wasn't a duel. This was an execution. "You have no chance," Voktharis finally spoke, his voice deep and thunderous, echoing across the battlefield. "Accept your fate, human." Darren didn't answer. There was no room for words, no escape. Only one choice: fight. The battle erupts. Voktharis lunged, a black blur slicing through the storm. Darren's instincts took over. He dove to the side, barely evading the monstrous impact as Voktharis's fist slammed into the ground. A shockwave exploded outward, sending a blast of energy rippling through the desert floor, nearly knocking Darren off his feet. He pushed himself up, only to find Voktharis already in front of him. Too fast. With a flick of his wrist, a blade of pure energy extended from Voktharis's forearm, its edge vibrating with lethal intent. Darren backpedaled, but the blade came for him. His battle-honed reflexes saved him. He dropped low, sliding across the sand, and in a single motion delivered a vicious kick aimed at Voktharis's knee. No effect. The Xhorya warlord didn't even flinch. Instead, he seized Darren by the throat, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. "You are weak." The words were final, and then he squeezed. Agonizing pain shot through Darren's ribs as if her strength crushed his body inch by inch. His breath was stolen, his vision darkened, he was dying, until a voice cut through the storm. "Let him go." Everything stopped. The unbearable pressure vanished as Voktharis' grip loosened. Darren collapsed onto the scorching sand, gasping, his lungs burning as he fought to breathe again. And when he looked up, Xhorya was standing there. Her eyes were no longer cold. She had made her choice. "What are you doing?" Voktharis' voice was no longer calm. A new edge of wariness crept into it. Xhorya didn't answer immediately. She met his gaze and slowly raised her hand. A faint glow appeared in her palm, an invisible bond fracturing, an unseen connection severing. Voktharis froze. He knew exactly what that meant. "Impossible." His voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl, disbelief flashing across his face. "You severed our spirit link?" A stunned silence fell over the arena. Darren didn't fully grasp the weight of what had just happened, but he could see the sheer horror in the eyes of every Xhorya around them. "That's not all," Xhorya continued, her voice steady and resolute. She turned, this time locking eyes with Darren. "I have bonded with him." Darren's breath caught. Voktharis took a step back. This was impossible. The spirit link between a Xhorya parent and their child was sacred, an unbreakable connection that had never been severed in the history of their race. Unless a Xhorya willingly destroyed it, a choice no one had ever dared to make. And instead of severing it into nothingness, Xhorya had linked herself to a human. Voktharis roared. "Traitor!" Xhorya did not blink. She had chosen her path, and now everything had changed. The arena still trembled around them. The air hung heavy with the aftermath of battle, scorched ruins, lingering streaks of energy flickering in the air, and at the center of it all, Darren stood on the precipice of life and death. Opposite him, Voktharis remained an imposing figure, exuding the unshakable presence of an undefeated warrior. His breaths were slow, measured, his piercing gaze locked onto Darren, as if waiting for the smallest mistake, the slightest weakness, to end him in an instant. But he did not strike, because he had just witnessed something that shattered the very foundation of his existence. Xhorya, his daughter, had severed their spirit link to bond with a human. It was irreversible, unthinkable. Darren struggled to steady his breathing, every nerve in his body screaming in pain. He stood firm, refusing to collapse before his enemy. He had no idea what would come next, but one thing was certain. Voktharis would not let this humiliation go unanswered. And then, a sound cut through the tension, a faint, pained gasp, fragile yet carrying immense weight. Darren turned. Xhorya was kneeling, clutching her abdomen. Her face was pale, her breaths ragged. And then through the fragile connection between them, a bond Darren had only just begun to understand, he felt it. A surge of overwhelming emotion, pain, change, something new. And in that instant, he understood. She was in labor. Everything came to a halt. Voktharis stared at Xhorya, and for the first time his cold, unyielding gaze fractured. Something more complex, something primal flashed in his eyes. The Zephyr bloodline was pure. It could never mix. That was an unbreakable law of their biology, an absolute truth of their existence. And yet, before him, the impossible was happening. A hybrid child, something that could not exist, was about to be born. The weight of its existence shattered everything he believed in. Darren could feel the silent tremor coursing through Vaktaris. The warlord's fists clenched, his massive form tensed, muscles coiling like a storm held at bay. Killing Darren now meant killing the father of this child. A simple decision for a warrior, but not so simple for a man who was about to become the grandfather of something unprecedented. Silence stretched between them. Darren took a step forward, staggering from his wounds but standing firm. His eyes did not waver. "If you want to kill me, do it now." His voice rang through the desolate arena. "But don't think that will change the truth. This child already exists." Vaktaris did not respond immediately. His breathing deepened, as if suppressing a raging storm within. His gaze, sharp as a blade, bore into Darren. But he did not strike. He couldn't. Because, whether he accepted it or not, the impossible had already become reality. Xhorya let out another cry, her body trembling as the pain intensified. Darren didn't hesitate. He rushed to her side, dropping to his knees, his hand gripping hers tightly. He could feel her pain. He could feel the waves of energy pulsing through her as if he himself were living this moment alongside her. And then he felt something else. A heartbeat. Faint, delicate, but unmistakably real. A third heartbeat, the life of their child. Vaktaris closed his eyes. He turned away, ignoring the stares of the surrounding Zephyr. There was no execution, no command for bloodshed. He spoke only a single sentence: "Prove that it deserves to exist." And then he disappeared into the darkness. Above them, the sky detonated in a maelstrom of energy. Spirals of light twisted and intertwined like rivers of fire, cascading across the arena and reflecting upon the ancient stones of the Zephyr civilization. Columns of raw energy erupted, spiraling wildly, as if the universe itself was etching this moment into history. The birth of something impossible. Xhorya screamed. Her body trembled, veins of blue energy pulsing beneath her skin, a luminous network of power surging like the lifeblood of a star on the verge of collapse. Darren knelt beside her, gripping her hand tightly, feeling every tremor of pain through their psychic bond. And then, a heartbeat. Not Xhorya's, not his, but the child's. A blinding light erupted as the baby took its first breath. The very air fractured, sending ripples of force radiating outward, a shockwave that thundered through the highest echelons of the Zephyr Council. Every gaze turned to the arena, to the newborn life that belonged to neither world alone, but to both. Xhorya collapsed, exhausted, into Darren's arms, but her eyes shone with something far greater than pain. In her trembling grasp lay the infant, small, delicate, but unmistakably extraordinary. Its skin shimmered with an iridescent glow, the merging of two species. Its eyes opened, one reflecting the luminous depths of the Zephyr, the other burning with the fire of humanity. No one spoke, not even Vaktaris. The supreme warlord, the unshakable force of his people, stood silent, his expression carved in conflict. Darren held the child close, his other hand resting on Xhorya's shoulder, feeling the faint, fragile breaths of them both. And in that moment, he knew. They were no longer two lost souls adrift in the vast expanse of the cosmos. They had become part of something greater, something that would alter the course of history. But the child's existence did not mean the battle was over. Far above, in the highest chambers of Zephyr authority, the council watched. Their faces, ageless, unyielding, merciless, measured the weight of this moment. Would they accept the child as a symbol of a new era, a bridge between two civilizations? Or would they see it as an abomination, a violation of their sacred biological laws? Would this birth herald the end of war or ignite the final, most devastating battle? Darren was not going to wait for their answer. He turned to Xhorya. She already knew. No matter the council's verdict, they would not let the fate of their child be dictated by those who had never embraced change. Xhorya whispered something, a single command in the ancient tongue of the Zephyr, and reality fractured. A rift tore open before them, a gateway. Darren held the child, Xhorya standing at his side, both gazing into the swirling abyss, a path untraveled, a future unseen. One last time, Darren looked back. Voktharis still stood in the ruins of the battlefield, unmoving. Their eyes met, and for the briefest instant, there was understanding. Not as enemies, but as those who had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. No parting words, no promises, only silence and a step into the unknown. And then they were gone, vanishing into the stars, into the boundless expanse of the cosmos, leaving behind a civilization at the edge of destiny, a question unanswered. Would the child of two worlds be the dawn of peace, or the spark of the final great war?